Right. Can you hear me? Good morning. All right. You muted yourself, which is fine. That's all good. That's all good. I'll just ask for the moderator to let me know if there's any questions in the room. Good morning, everybody. I am so sad that I'm not there in person with you this year. I love coming to Wade. It's one of my favorite trainings that I give. And I'm always tickled when I get asked to come back. So today I'm speaking to you from my office, and I have some big news to share. Today is my 30th year working for NRCS, 30th year today. And I started when I was 6 years old, so I can't possibly be as old as I am. But 30 years, and I still really, really believe in what NRCS does. And I love what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm feeling pretty good today. And my husband said, well, why don't you just tell him that and say, oh, so any questions? But as fun as that would be, we'll try to keep this somewhat organized this morning. So for those of you who have not met me, I have worked as an area biologist 27 of my 30 years with NRCS, all of it from a field office. I started up in Puyallup and I moved down to the Clark County office about 4 years into my career. So I've spent most of it in a field office, which is one of the reasons why I think that I like my job so much, is I get to be in the office with the planners and then the customers that keep us all doing what we do. I have a background in fisheries and wildlife biology from Oregon State University, and my day-to-day activities now, I am the area biologist for Western Washington, and I also have a collateral duty as our state fisheries biologist. And so that's me. You may see me pop up around the state on the east side of the mountains, looking at fisheries projects, beaver habitat restoration, and sometimes I get pulled into wetland discussions. So that is me. This morning with our 50 minutes together, 50 minutes is never a whole lot of time. So I'm going to run through kind of a very, very basic presentation, very short, maybe 15 minutes, of basic habitat inventory principles in conservation planning that apply to NRCS and conservation district planners. And then I'm just going to show you a few of my favorite things that I'm really using now that are kind of the most up-to-date wildlife habitat work that and processes that we're seeing implemented on working lands. And since we're in the farms and fields tract, I've tried to keep it sort of out of the forestry and direct stream realm. So today that's sort of the plan. And then we'll try to leave a few minutes for questions, things that are on your mind programmatically, NRCS practices, kind of what's coming. So I am yours. So I'm going to jump into it now. So wildlife habitat inventory tools. When we are doing conservation planning, looking at habitat and fish and wildlife resources is just one of many, many things that we.
Rachel,
Oh, yes, go ahead.
we can't see your.
Oh, darn it. Rookie move, rookie move. Okay, sorry. For me, it's coming through like super, super clear. That's right. I'm sharing the screen. Okay, I have the power. Okay, let's try that again, shall we? Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here's my cover slide. These are really old slides. I promised Sam I would do this if she didn't make me do a whole new presentation. So here we go. All right. I'm going to, all right, put it in from the beginning. Come on. There we go. All righty. So as I was saying, fish and wildlife habitat inventory is just one of many of the SWAPA resources that we inventory during the conservation planning process. As with all resource concerns, we inventory wildlife resource problems and opportunities. We do this to meet the client objectives. Oftentimes when I'm called out to a farm, that client is interested in doing good things for a variety of wildlife species. Sometimes they're very specific in the creatures that they want to improve living conditions for. Other times I get brought in to avoid, to help them manage their property, to avoid having more of said thing come to their farm, primarily waterfowl during the winter when they're eating all of their crops, or sometimes trying to mitigate wildlife damage with beaver or elk or other large creatures that crash through fences. Within an NRCS realm, we look at wildlife habitat to satisfy policy and National Environmental Policy Act requirements, and we document the existing condition of those habitat features in our planning process. So A is the other A, the wildlife is the other A in animals. We look at inventorying benchmark conditions for fish and wildlife and livestock. Primarily, terrestrial habitat will be discussed today, and NRCS changed the names of our resource concerns a few years ago, so they're very long now. But the official name of our habitat resource concerns that we're looking for are terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrate, really focusing in on NRCS's hard look at how do we improve habitat for invertebrates on working lands, really focusing in on beneficial insects and pollinators. And then the other side of my job, the aquatic habitat for fish and other organisms. Oh, that's spelled wrong. That's been spelled wrong for 8 years and no one said anything. Well, that's embarrassing. All right, and then today we're not going to talk about livestock. That is someone else's lane. The inventory tools that I'm going to talk about for the most part can be found in the Field Office Technical Guide. I am going to be attaching all of those to this presentation, and Sam already has them all. I will tell you that not all of these tools are located in Washington's FOTG, and it is 100% okay to shop around at our neighboring states. And so today I'm going to talk about a tool from Idaho and a tool from Oregon. Idaho's looking at farmstead habitat, and Oregon's is looking at beaver habitat and sort of where to do all of our fancy low-tech process-based restoration. That's all what the cool kids are doing these days with BDAs and PALs. So we're going to talk about a habitat tool that I stole from Oregon. So if you're ever looking for something, please feel free to shop around into neighboring states. The one thing that I will say that you should use caution on is the target planning criteria level may be different state to state. So for example, on a national scope, NRCS's target planning criteria level when we're looking at bringing habitat resource concerns back up to snuff is 50%. That's the target nationwide across all habitat types that we are aiming for. Here in Washington State, for those of you who have ever used our Biology Technical Note 14, which is our primary habitat inventory tool, you will notice that we changed that planning criteria level based on the land use type. So for example, riparian areas, we want to achieve 70% of the possible points in that habitat evaluation. Our aquatic habitats are very important, as you guys all know, supporting our listed salmon and steelhead. In the forestry realm, upland woodland, we try to bring that number up to 60%. So that's the one place I would say use caution. The tools themselves can be used across state lines. Wildlife don't care where the state line is. But the planning criteria that's required to achieve meeting that resource concern threshold differs. Okay, all right. So here in Washington, we have to start with talking about Wildlife Biology Tech Note 14. This is kind of our meat and potatoes wildlife habitat inventory, and we have assessment sheets for forest land, open land category, which is crop, pasture, and hayland, riparian forest, wetland, rangeland, and then for the in-stream condition, there's a place in there for you to copy the results of your stream visual assessment protocol. In the olden days, we used to have different questions in Tech Note 14 looking at streams, and that was silly. And so now you fill out one tool, SVAP, for inventorying streams and rivers and other linear systems. Just a quick introduction to what a resource concern looks like if you're new to the conservation planning world. Under terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrates, Remember, that's one of 2 habitat resource concerns that we might be documenting in our conservation plans. The definition of that is the quantity, quality, or connectivity of food, cover space, and shelter and/or water is inadequate to meet the requirements of the identified terrestrial, wildlife, or invertebrate species. So it's very, very broad. We can use these tools to look at general habitat condition for like a whole wide variety of species, or we can then go into something specific, like let's say the monarch butterfly, and run an evaluation tool that will determine what our benchmark condition is. All right. So the objective within the conservation planning is then to improve the quantity and quality of habitat to meet the requirements of said identified species. And then the tools that we can use as conservation planners are wildlife habitat evaluation guides. And here's where I was saying this is the national planning criteria level, meeting 0.5 or 50% of the maximum score of that tool. If you don't have a tool available, which I will say, for the majority of species that we work with on a day-to-day basis, there is not a specific species habitat evaluation guide available. And so the next best thing is to ring up a biologist like me, or your conservation districts are starting to hire habitat specialists, which I really love. And we can go out and we can evaluate the habitat conditions for you and write you up a little email documenting the limiting factors, and you go off on your merry way going through the planning process. So the expectations for Biology Tech Note 14 specifically is it provides indicators of limiting factors for habitat. You will complete a worksheet for each land use on your planning unit, and then basically you will get a rough estimate of the overall habitat value. The tool was developed to consider needs of a whole host of wildlife species. So it's, again, the Biology Tech Note 14 is not going to give you very specific information for any one creature. But in the end, the questions or the evaluation criteria of all of these wildlife habitat evaluation guides, WHEG or WAG for short, are I really going to identify limiting factors in food, cover, water, and space. Biology Tech Note 14, though it is sort of our bread and butter, is very basic. If you want to go deeper, there's a variety of species-specific habitat assessments. The one on the screen is super old school. These habitat suitability index models were developed in the 60s, 70s, and in early 80s for a variety of species. They really are very technical. And at the end of the day, as conservation planners, I don't think they give us a whole lot of help. I think that utilizing professional experience and talking to others that work in the area, once you've identified a problem, those folks are going to be able to help you come up with solutions. But these models were developed sort of more in the academic setting and really get into depth on life history requirements for these creatures. Other habitat assessments, we've got a threats assessment for sage grouse. The Xerces Society has a variety of WAGs for pollinators and beneficial insects, and then there's one specific for rangeland. I'll show you those in just a few moments. And then there's the habitat suitability index models like I just spoke about. This is an example of our sage grouse habitat condition assessment. It goes through the various different habitat types that sage grouse need to complete their life cycle, and you're going to come up with a condition of that habitat. I will attach that one. We're not going to spend time on that today since that's more of a rangeland setting. Here's an example of the Xerces Habitat Assessment Guide. We'll look at one of these in depth if we have time. I feel like most of you in the room have probably been exposed to the Xerces guides at this point, but they're very fast. They're rapid assessments. They're filled with lovely pictures as examples, way, way better in quality than NRCS's Biology Tech Note 14. So if you're going to do anything on a farmscape, for habitat assessment, highly recommend running the Pollinator Habitat Assessment Guide. It's going to identify limitations in bloom periods for pollinators. It's going to identify other limiting factors for nesting and breeding habitat for these creatures. And for the most part, these are fairly simple management and planting practices to implement. I say simple in quotes because simple always involves setting aside some portion of working land for habitat. And our jobs as planners, that's probably the most difficult thing, is convincing someone to actually give up cropland. We can get tricky and work in sort of odd areas that aren't in agricultural production. That's where I always start looking at ditch lines, fence lines, areas around pumps, watering facilities, outside of animal agricultural areas, places where they're not currently cropping, farming, or grazing. Those are the places that I like to look first, but we can talk in depth a little later about management techniques within those areas that might work. So I'm going to shut my door because I have folks in my office. One moment. Rachel? Sorry about that. All right. So before you go out to the field to run whatever habitat evaluation tool that you're going to, the main thing you want to do is familiarize yourself with wildlife populations that might be common in your work area. Apologies for the state. This is a presentation I gave in Oregon, but in Washington, we have our state wildlife habitat action plan. I have a slide at the end of this presentation that's going to identify at-risk habitats and creatures that are residing in our state. Our version of the Oregon Wildlife Explorer is the priority habitat and species on the web that you guys can all access. That's going to give you a general idea of what's in the area. And the priority habitat and species data is not just those at-risk species, but it also gives you game species because Washington considers those a priority. So you're going to find places where you might have turkey, where you might have, let's see, what's another, some pheasant releases, and those types of things will also be in the data. You can access U.S. Fish and Wildlife listed species using the IPAC database, talking to tribal biologists, talking to your local birder community who love to talk about what's in the area, looking those things up. So just becoming familiar with what you might run into. I'm going to skip ahead because we're not in Umatilla County. I'm trying to get to the good stuff here. So review of aerial photography. The other thing that I always try to do, even if it's for 5 minutes before I go to the field, because I'm always showing up without a ton of time to prepare when I get asked to come to the field. But I always look at Google Earth and aerial photography. And I zoom into our planning site and then quickly zoom out. And as a biologist, I'm really looking at that landscape level to figure out what resources I have or don't have. So I'm looking at large blocks of habitat. I'm looking at where's my water, where is my permanent streams, where is my seasonal water sources, and I'm looking at the connectivity potential or non-connectivity potential between my planning unit and these larger habitat items, these blocks of habitat. And I'm also looking at potential migratory or access barriers such as highways, urban development, and fences. We're going to talk about fences in a moment. It's really helpful if you're using GIS to turn on your hydrology layer and your wetland layers when you're looking at just an overall view of habitat and what might be available in your planning area. Because remember, as much as we think we're in control of wildlife, they definitely do not respect property boundaries. And so knowing what they're using on the land and kind of within a mile is kind of the bigger focus. But a lot of our big game species and waterfowl are using a landscape level. So just kind of knowing how your landowner fits into that. And if anybody of you have ever taken my SVAP class, one of the first things we talk about that in our stream assessment class is where is your property in the watershed? Are you at the headwaters, Are you close to the confluence with a large river? Are you in a transport reach kind of in the middle? So we have a good feel of what might be happening and who might be home. We're going to skip that for today. We're going to talk about CPA 52s. So I think for now, I'm scrolling through all of the listed species information because this is not an ESA talk. I want to talk about, here's the Washington SWAP, the State Wildlife Action Plan. This can be found on WDFW's website. And this is a really great tool, again, for identifying those really sexy, rare things, right? That we all get super excited if we ever get to see. But for the rest of this talk today, I want to talk about some of my favorite tools for looking and inventorying those everyday wildlife species that you're most likely to run into working with your landowners. So that was a speedy look through setting the scene on habitat inventory on working lands. And I will take questions as I sort of fumble here and get the next thing up. Any questions so far? I'm looking at Sam, so no questions. Okay.
No questions right now.
Okay. Get you back up here. All right, can you guys see my screen still? It should say Wildlife Habitat Appraisal Guide for Farmstead. Yes, okay, thumbs up. All right, great. So you guys, I wanted to talk about something different today than many of the tools I've gone over with conservation districts at Wade for years and years. And I'm in love with Idaho's Farmstead Wildlife Habitat Appraisal. This is also known as a WHAG, Wildlife Habitat Evaluation Guide. It has the overall same principles as Biology Tech Note 14 in that we're going to look at a series of evaluation factors. We're going to give it a score, and we're going to compare our average score to our benchmark. So for funsies, we're going to say that our target is 50%. And the reason why I'm focusing in on the farmstead today is because, to me, farmsteads, you guys, really equate to urban conservation planning and planning in places with a lot of people. This wildlife habitat evaluation guide can translate over very easy to small farms. And when I'm talking about small farms, I'm talking about maybe 5 acres or less. Maybe it's a 1/4 acre. This habitat evaluation guide fits all of those scales. And even if you're looking at, I think you can scale it up to a farmstead that is the headquarters for a large hay operation or a large ranching operation. These are the basic principles that are fairly simple and mostly inexpensive. We can always get crazy with some of our wildlife structures, but these are those everyday average things that I think it's important for us to all have in our toolbox, because landowners, for the most part, most people are not out there to like annihilate wildlife, unless it's like mice in the grain barn and stuff like that. And when we start getting into those issues, then it becomes a little touchy. And beavers make some landowners twitchy still. So those are the two things that I often get asked about that get into the, how do I get rid of this creature? But for the most part, we're just going to go over the tool today, and I will try to scroll slowly so we don't have any motion sickness. The top of this tool looks like anything else that we fill out at the NRCS with the basic information about the owner operator, where you are, the date, and your field office. So for clarity's sake for this tool, a farmstead is land used for facilities and supporting infrastructure where farming, forestry, animal husbandry, and ranching activities are often initiated, also known as the farmstead, the farm headquarters, the home place, the homestead. There's many names for it. But this includes all of those areas where we've got a lot of buildings. Typically, we have a lot of impervious surfaces with paved surfaces or compacted gravel surfaces. This is where the human activity is really based out of. Wildlife food and cover in these environments includes the vegetation in or immediately adjacent to the farmstead that is not intensively managed for human food or forage production, and can also include structures intentionally installed to attract and support wildlife. This can also include areas of vegetation. I'm going to say the flower beds, right? This can include the flower beds or an adjacent odd area that's not intensively farmed that right now just might be a stand of weeds. And I look at that as a potential place to install pollinator habitat. Farmsteads can also include those aquatic environments, streams, ponds, and wetlands that we want to look at. And we basically want to keep the nasty stuff from the farmstead from running into those water bodies. That's our primary target there. And this guide assumes that the area under that are providing wildlife food and cover must be under the control of that operator. And this tool looks at threats that commonly occur on the farmstead and offers up the best management practices that can be applied. So that sets the stage. And again, this translates very, very well to small farms. So the first question we look at is the amount of wildlife food and cover. This is pretty simple. It gives a wide range. So for funsies, we're just going to put some numbers in today just so you can see how this works. Okay, so I'm going to put a score in. There's a place for some notes you can write. The next, the next question is the general composition of that wildlife food and cover. So what's out there? Is it dominated by grasses, forbs, and or trees that are native to insert Washington? So native species are going to get the maximum points. Is it a mixture of introduced and native species? Is it all introduced species that function similar to natives and include forbs or flowering shrubs? We got to have something blooming out there. Is it one thing, a monoculture of one introduced species? Is it a ryegrass lawn? Is it cheatgrass? What do we got out there? Is it solid blackberry? Is the only green thing solid blackberry? Blackberries are not all bad. So we'll give it a point. So in this example, I put a 3. Oop, I didn't give this one a 3. We're going to give this a 5 up above. So we've talked about how much habitat we have, what type of vegetation is there. Then we're going to look at, so what specifically is that vegetation providing as far as wildlife food? Is it seeds from a native herbaceous plant? Is it hard or soft mass, fancy biologist name for fruit, and nuts from a native tree or shrubs? Does it give native browse from a shrub? Does it provide berries? That seems like a bit of an overlap there. All right, doesn't matter. Native grasses for grazing wildlife species, which can be ungulates or it can be geese or widgeon. Pollinator species from the native species. And then we get some points for pollen or flower production from non-native species. Or is there a wildlife food plot? Are we harvesting a plot of barley or corn or something specifically that we're going to leave for habitat? And the way this works is what you basically can get a maximum of 10 points. So you only want to count a single species in one of these categories. But I'm going to give this landowner 2 points. This is a big gravel farmstead, not a lot going on there. So what is there is not great. It's probably one species of browse. All right, so then we get into where's the shelter, where's the cover on this from this farmstead. So so we look at wooded areas and they need to be a minimum size of 1,200 square feet. That's not too big. It's not too much. Do you have shrubs, patches of brambles? This is where our blackberries can come in. They make great cover, not great for providing a native habitat type for, they outcompete most of our natives, but excellent for cover. Do we have rock piles or a rock wall? Non-mortared rock wall. We got to make sure we got cracks and crevices for the creatures to get up into. Evergreen trees, log piles, I will not read them all, but you can see that you can start adding points to your score based on some features that are there. None of this is super hard to identify. It does not take a lot of time, which is why I wanted to bring it to your guys' attention today. because as much as I think wildlife is the most important part of conservation planning, your landowner most likely doesn't have you on the farm because of a wildlife objective. Every once in a while we get those people, and I love them, but they're there to have you look at other things that are affecting their economic bottom line. So the next element we're looking at is habitat for breeding and rearing young. A lot of these are going to be replicates of up above, but it's looking at very specific habitat for rearing and breeding. Breeding and rearing, I guess the breeding comes before the rearing, right? So mature trees, meadow and grassland or shrub steppe, nesting boxes, host plants for monarch butterfly or other native butterflies. Remember, our caterpillars are super picky little guys, and even though the adults will flit around and nectar from a lot of different variety of sources, most of our native butterflies are very species and host specific when they're in their larval caterpillar form. So if you've got a landowner that wants a specific type of butterfly, do some quick research. It's all out on the web, what they like to eat, and then inventory for that specific plant. 2 or more pollinator nesting habitats from Idaho Pollinator WAG. Okay, so we'd have to insert our own WAG, and I'm going to show you the one that I like the best in a minute. And then we've got water and dead snags or trees. So on my gravel farmstead, I'm going to say we've got like one kind of sad nest box out there. So I'm going to give them 2 points. Number 6, these are really, if you look at the reverse of what I'm going to read, these are kind of the threats. You can look at these as threats to wildlife. So we're looking at the use of chemicals and fertilizers. If we're not using them on the farmstead, they get points. Making sure that our watering troughs are fitted with wildlife escape ramps. Making sure that baling twine in our hay barn is collected and properly disposed of, because birds they love to grab that and put it in their nests, which can create an entanglement issue for young species. Do they have any water saving practices? Are they collecting water, or are they xeriscaping? Uncapped pipes, you guys, looking at markers. Uncapped pipes are often used to denote property lines. And those uncapped pipes are just death traps for birds and small mammals and reptiles. I was actually looking for some pictures to show you, and I decided to not ruin your morning. But if it's an uncapped pipe, even if it's a 1-inch diameter uncapped pipe, one of the easiest things we can do is get landowners to cap those things, because almost every single pipe that you will find will have some sort of dead wildlife in it. They get in there because it's nice and shady and they can't get out. Looking at compost, landscaping on the yard is incorporating native plants. You can continue to read the threats, but all of these things are a teaching moment when you're going through this guide with your landowner. These are all things that we can do fairly easily without a ton of additional planning, like on the spot management changes that you can give these suggestions to your landowner when they leave. All right, so we're going to put a few points in there. Again, maximum 10 points. So our overall score is 3.3. Let me make sure I got a score in each of my boxes here. Sometimes I get talking and I don't put a number in. That's it. All right. So literally we have 6 things that we're looking at, six elements. I kind of look at this last one, number 6, as those wildlife threats and things that we can easily reverse. And our average score here is 3.3. And again, we're looking for anything that's at or above 5. So our farmstead would be below planning criteria. And we have a variety of NRCS practices that we can put into conservation plans to do all of these things that we've talked about. There's a variety of planting practices. We have our upland habitat management practice 645 that you can write them a prescription for, Cap your pipes, put a bell on your cat. And this is, I know this, some of these things sound like kind of laughable that we'd even be talking about this with our landowners, but it's really important that we look at all management changes, very small, all the way up to, changing vegetation from a non-native stand of grass to something with flowering forbs in it. We have a variety of practices to do that. We don't have to pay for every single thing that we recommend. Remember that as well. Sometimes I see NRCS staff kind of getting stumbled up in, well, we don't have a payment scenario for that. And it's like, that's okay. We don't have to pay for every single thing that we fix out there. So I think this farmstead guide, if you took one walkaway tool from this talk today, this is it. I think we need to start looking at the farmstead and the area immediately surrounding the farmstead, or translate this over into urban agriculture to look at habitat. Questions while I go to our next tool?
Let her know.
Rachel, I think we
Yes.
had a question in the chat.
Two questions.
Two questions.
Okay.
Question, but they can go first.
Okay.
Okay.
Upper limit.
The upper limit of the tool was what one of the questions was. I know you kind of mentioned there was a range, but we didn't know if there was something that's too big.
Yeah. So let's say these general principles. Hold on one second. I have to scold my people out here. Just one moment.
Get him, Rachel. Her boss is still thinking that.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't often have people in my office. It's just very loud out there today. Okay, so the upper limit of the farmstead tool that we just looked at, I would say there really is not one for farmstead size. I think as far as taking these habitat assessment principles out into the active working land area, this is a great place to start. But if we're on a rangeland setting, let's say we're on a 500-acre ranch, I would not want to just stop at using the farmstead guide, because it doesn't get into plant community structure. It doesn't get into what's the word? Density of weed species. It doesn't get into some of those kind of bread and butter habitat elements that you would be able to assess better using a sage grouse habitat assessment, or even our rangeland health indicators out there when you're looking at livestock forage, or the rangeland tab of biology, Techno 14. If you literally only have time for one tool and you want to do it quick because honestly your landowner's not too interested in habitat, I would say use the farmstead tool. It's better than nothing. Okay, so that's my answer. Is I think the tool was intended for farmstead use only, but I think we can push the limits of it as long as you remember to look at other habitat tools when you have time. Not a great answer, but the best I have for now.
And then what was the second one?
Are there parameters that you're looking at for black-tailed deer fawning habitat? And we can get an answer and send it later if needed, but is there a specific one that you use for that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't have a specific habitat guide for deer specifically. But I think that, yes, I can put an answer together for you. Just what pops into my head right now is I see deer bedded down in kind of at field edges in the tall grass, and then also riparian areas. And oftentimes our riparian areas have tall reed canary grass in them. And that's where I will see mom leave the baby while she goes off to eat in the alfalfa stand. So I would look at habitat assessments for riparian areas for a place to start, but I can see what I can find for specific for blacktail. I'll make a note of that.
I had a
Sam,
quick-
if you could get that person's information so I know who to send the answer to, that'd be great.
Yep, it's in the chat and I
Oh.
can send you a note about it too.
Okay, thanks.
And I think we had one more question.
Yeah, so I actually really appreciate that you said that this resource could be used for like urban agriculture.
Yeah.
That's actually the department that I'm in, and we have a urban farm program in conjunction with the city of Tacoma, where they're giving plots of land to farmers to provide equity. Now, it's in the middle of the city, so with based on some of the criteria that you mentioned, like these farms don't have like a human living on them, but there's a house next door, there's an apartment building being built behind it, there's a retention pond on the other side of the fence. Now, even though they don't meet the criteria in terms of like it being on the property within control, would we be able to use this worksheet with those in consideration, even if we don't have control over it?
I would say yes, 100%, because what you have control over is that farm plot where you can implement and put a lot of this habitat feature. So I would be remiss if I didn't say we have to be a little bit aware of the concept of sort of like baiting wildlife into an unfriendly area. Like the perfect example of that is one time I was approached to do a project with DOT to look at improving pollinator habitat in the median of Highway 101. And I was like, I'm not going to lure butterflies in here to to die. Like they're going to end up as
Yeah.
bait on all of our vehicles. But so with that in mind, we need pollinators to make that cropland successful. And so that's why I like the farmstead evaluation, because it looks at ways to increase flowering things. It looks at possible ways to increase nesting habitat for birds, which we can do through structures. We can increase raptor perching habitat if that's something that we want to do. So I think it's a great starting place. Even if it doesn't fit exactly, you guys, just going through the principles of what you're inventorying was the whole point of sharing this. So yeah, I would love to hear how it goes. If you use it in the urban setting, your empty lot, kind of like very stereotypical urban ag setting, on a rooftop garden, I would love to know how it works out for you guys.
Yeah, no, that's great, because right now at our site, we're having issues we want to encourage the native birds and pollinators that are around to stay, but we're having problems with the European starlings. So I know that they're a species that likes to perch, so one of my coworkers usually works with wildlife in a previous life, so this is actually gonna be really helpful for that.
Great, good.
Even if it's just discouraging invasive species out, we don't want to encourage anyone that, would be at risk, but making sure the birds, that are native can find some place to roost at the very least.
Whole size in your bird boxes, you guys. I can't emphasize that enough. It will keep the starlings out and annual maintenance. So any other questions in the room? Like immediately 50 minutes is gone. Like I don't know what happens. Time vaporizes, but I want to show you guys a couple of other things that are sort of new and I think applicable to our world now. Let me make this a little bigger. I'm still sharing screens, hopefully. This is the Beaver Assisted Wildlife Habitat Evaluation Guide. This is the simple version. I don't know what the complex version is. I haven't found that version of it yet, but I stole this from Oregon. And this is basically an assessment that you can use if you've got a landowner that's interested in doing process-based restoration hand-built structures. Kind of the goal for our beaver dam analogs and our post-assisted log structures is kind of the end goal is to bring beaver back into those systems so that they will maintain those structures on their own. And so we don't have time to go all over this, but I'm going to scroll through it quickly. This is going to help you determine how likely it is that beaver are in the area. So you want to evaluate the reach that you're planning or looking to plan these structures on. And then you also want to pop into the watershed at some other locations if you can get permission, public properties are good too, that look for other areas that may already be in better shape to support habitat. Yes, we can do process-based restoration without actual beavers, but it takes continued inputs by humans over time. So the idea is to build it and have them come. And that's such a cliche, but that's literally what we're looking for. So the first thing we're looking at is there food for them to support dam building? There's better vegetation and bad vegetation for that. Is there stuff for the beavers to eat? Is the channel situated sized so that they could potentially build dams? Looking at if the dams would withstand floods, and that is pretty much it. And then we get into a few other considerations down here that are risk-based of tolerance. And so then here's attracting or acquiring beavers, some things for you to consider. And that is about it. So it's just another really quick and dirty evaluation for, are we in a site that might be able to support beavers now? And if we need to get it ready in the future, you can go back through those assessment elements. We can't change the channel size. That's one thing we cannot change, the channel size. But we can change the vegetation that's in the planning unit. So I will upload that, and Sam will also have this information for you guys. And then the last thing that I think we have time for here to show you guys is there's a brand new tech note out that's looking at improving fences for passing migratory big game. You guys, this is an amazing resource. The amount of fence that NRCS cost shares in a year alone, I'm not even gonna lie, it's literally the amount of footage to to circumnavigate the globe. That is a ton of fencing, and that's a true statistic. We had some numbers run. And the thing that I want to leave with you in the last few minutes is, if you're planning a new fence, please stop and ask yourself and have the discussion with the landowner. Is there anything else that we can do than build a permanent fence? I completely understand the need for fencing and all of the conservation benefits that come with that. But I think we've become so ingrained into just jumping into those fencing options that we forget to ask ourselves, can we get away with a temporary fence? The remote fencing operations are becoming more and more feasible now. I just saw a presentation by Gallagher looking at their units, the collars, the radio collars that, not radio collar, well, I guess they kind of are radio collars. The invisible fencing, so this is like invisible dog fencing, but on a large livestock level. So that's what I ask, is at least ask yourself, is a permanent fence really needed, especially in the riparian zone world, where we've got higher, flashier flows. So this is an amazing resource. It goes species by species and talks about their jumping abilities, their visual abilities, how well they see different types of fences, and goes into a lot of mitigation options and options for changing the fences that we already have on the landscape. NRCS has cost share funding for fence removal and fence modification. And then we can also look at adding fence markers, visual fence markers under wildlife structures, and a lot of other things. So if you've got a project where you want to have your landowner apply for NRCS funding for fence modification and you're unsure how to proceed, contact me or Peter McBride, our state wildlife biologist, and we can give you some suggestions. But this is a really great place for you to start. And with that, I'm out of time, I believe. I think I had till 9:50. And so I'm going to upload the Monarch WAG as well into your resources. I will upload a version of Biology TechNote 14 and all of the other 3 tools that I talked about. Don't be afraid to talk about general fish and wildlife, you guys. I get kind of frustrated from time to time in conversations with my peers, because oftentimes we zoom quickly into the at-risk and unordinary species. And Those things excite a very small fraction of our working landowners. Some of them, yes, but not very many of them. What is translated in broader terms is things that we can do for those common species. So let's try to keep those common wildlife species common in Washington State. Thanks, guys. I'll stick around if we have time for questions, any other follow-ups. Make sure in your reviews, your speaker assessments, evaluations, if any of one of these ideas or concepts that I've presented briefly today interests you, put it down and we can plan to go into depth next year at Wade.
Do we, I don't know if you know off the top of your head where it's easy to find a copy of the Farmstead WEG tool, Rachel, could you repeat that?
Yeah, I looked for it. It's not easy to find, so I'll make sure I get to you because I couldn't even find it in Idaho's Tech Guide. So I don't know if they ever pulled the trigger on publishing it, but it's good to go for me. And I'm poking at our state biologist to get it adopted here in Washington State, but feel free to take it and customize it for your county. You know, there's a few places that got into a couple of different specific species that might make up shrub steppe or your shrub community. Add those in, customize it for your work area. None of these tools are like, you know, trademarked. They're meant to be altered and made user-friendly for your areas. So I will make sure that I have that in the chat here or in the resources and the documents in here, and then Sam has them all as well and can share them however all the things are getting stored for Wade.
Any other questions? Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
You guys enjoy your